Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are not quite to the top of the hour, so I'm going to give it, I don't know, 60 seconds or so for everyone to flood in, and then we will get started with our presentation today. All right, it is 1 o'clock. I'll go ahead and kick us off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rural Health Executive Educational Series. I'm Cody Smith. I'm the Director of Rural Partnerships and Leadership Development at NRHA Service Corporation, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator today. Before we dive in, there are a couple things to know. This session is being recorded, and we will email you the recording this afternoon. It goes out to everyone who registered, so no need to scramble for notes. You'll have everything at your fingertips. At the end of the session, we do ask for your feedback through a short survey, and if you could take that just a few minutes out of your day to fill that out, I'd really appreciate it. Your input really truly helps me shape these sessions and make them as useful as possible for you and your peers. Quickly, let's cover some housekeeping items. All attendees are muted. This is just to ensure the session runs smoothly. The presentation lasts about 45 minutes. This allows for some Q&A time at the end, but if you have a question, please don't wait. Go ahead and drop it into the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel as it comes to mind. This is your chance to ask our experts and get advice tailored to your unique challenges. Today, we're excited to have two exceptional speakers. Jeff Sommer has spent more than 2 decades working directly with rural hospitals on strategic planning, affiliations, and capital projects. His experience includes supporting critical access and community hospitals through replacement facility planning, service line development, and evaluation of partnership opportunities. He understands the complexity of rural healthcare environments and brings practical insight to help leaders navigate long-term decisions. And Claire Kelly focuses on the unique challenges facing critical access hospitals and rural health systems, including clinic operations, physician needs, and alignment with larger systems. Her work often involves helping rural hospitals assess strategic options, develop sustainable plans, and evaluate new facility investments. Her early background in global health mapping contributes to her detailed understanding of rural access issues and infrastructure planning. So with that, I will be quiet and I'll turn it over to our speakers for today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Cody. Claire and I are both thrilled to be here today. Really enjoy the opportunity to have a conversation with rural health leaders around these important issues. You can see there a little contact information and bio information on both Claire and myself. Happy to answer any questions that might come up. One of the things that really underpins our work is helping organizations understand what their strategic options are and what the relative risks of those options might be. And one of the key things that we really want to emphasize is that underpinning any option for an organization is the need to execute on performance. Operating results are really essential. So if the organization desires to remain independent, you need to have the performance and the operating results to be able to sustain that. If the organization decides that a partnership is the best option going forward, then it really is helpful to have at least a trajectory that's improving, ideally operating results that reduce the risk and enhance the value profile of the rural affiliate. So either of those scenarios, operating results are really essential. One of the challenges that Claire and I and Stroudwater have faced over the years in working with organizations, rural organizations, is it's equivalent to playing a hand of poker and not knowing what the specific game is and not knowing what you have in your hand. And the reason I say that, what you have in your hand is equivalent to the value that you bring to that particular game, or in this case, to your strategic option. And many rural healthcare organizations don't understand the value they bring, either as a standalone operating entity or as a prospective partner or existing partner. By the same token, many rural boards don't understand the risk profile of their preferred strategic option whether that's to remain independent or to seek partnership. So again, very difficult to have a good outcome of a game when you don't know the rules and you don't know what's in your hand. And that sadly is the situation that many rural organizations face, because they don't understand their risk profile, and they also don't have a good appreciation for the value they're bringing. And that's true for the folks across the table from you, whether it's a existing system partner or a prospective system partner. They often either undervalue or don't understand the value that rural brings to the equation. So please keep that in mind as we go through this. One of the things that's really important to understand is there's a continuum of outcomes here. And the best outcome is thriving independence or interdependence with a rural health system in control of its own destiny, and perhaps selecting those aspects that a system can provide to enhance them, but they're not dependent upon the system, and that partnership is performing at a high level and adding value. The next best option is a good partnership. So you've engaged in a partnership that's not predatory. That partner understands the value you bring and is committed to working with you to enhance that value for both of your benefit. And there are some of those partnerships that we see out there. The most common scenarios are the next two, however, where we see this kind of strategic drift. The organization's really not on a long-term sustainable or positive trajectory, but there's no immediate threat of insolvency or bankruptcy or closure. Yet it's clear the organization is not able and is not performing at a level it needs to fully fulfill its mission long-term. And there's some inherent risk there that's going unmitigated, unmanaged. The second to worst outcome is frankly a bad partnership. And we see these as well. And this is a situation where that system partner doesn't understand the value and is viewing the value from a more predatory or zero-sum game. That is, they only win if the rural affiliate loses. And so we see those partnerships out there, and obviously that's not a good outcome. And the way you mitigate that risk is making sure you have options, either an independence option to continue to operate independently, or you have options for alternative partners. And you do that by enhancing your operating results. The worst outcome is closure. I think there's pretty good consensus there. But what I would say, and that point at the bottom is really important, that 90% of rural hospitals fall somewhere in those middle three three options. And there's a very small minority there at that top end, and thankfully a relatively small minority in any given year that are at the closure end, but still a disturbing number for those communities that lose their hospital. We like to think of this slide as the 4 no's, or the 4 no-nos. Basically, you need to understand that in the vast majority of cases, a system partner, either prospective or existing, is missing critical aspects of your value and the value proposition you bring. And that's one of the opportunities that frankly exists out there for rural health systems. You also need to understand that no one's actually going to stumble across your value unless you're able to articulate it, quantify it, and operationalize it. And we spend a lot of our time working to educate both system partners and rural affiliates and prospective system partners and prospective affiliates as to that point. What is the nature of the value, quantifying the value, and making sure that partnerships embrace that value and support and sustain that value. Really important to have win-wins and make better decisions about allocating resources. We'll talk about this in a minute. But making sure that partner understands your values. So the 4 no-nos: know your risk profile, know your value, no one will promote your value unless you do, and there are no risk-free options available to you. So it's a challenging environment, but one that can be navigated to your advantage if you're careful and thoughtful and run a smart either operating strategy or partnership strategy. At the end of the day, what Stratwater is focused on and what Claire and I focus on in the partnerships practice is really trying to get to a point where we're making better decisions, getting better agreements that support better rural healthcare. We want those agreements to be contractually enforceable. We want them to be win-wins. But we often find, whether it's when evaluating an individual program or evaluating a rural affiliate, that value proposition is missed. And so resource allocation decisions, performance evaluation analyses, and really need to be scrutinized very carefully, because all too often they're done in a non-holistic or flawed way. So from our perspective at Stratwater, decisions around evaluating performance or evaluating a service or program should always be based upon variable or incremental costs, not reallocated fixed costs. Contribution margin should be the basis of those decisions. Are you covering your direct variable costs and then contributing towards overhead, as opposed to allocating a share of overhead and then saying, well, you're not fully offsetting that overhead? You end up with some flawed decisions in that basis. You also need to have a holistic view as to spin-off benefits as well. And so incredibly important. Lastly, cost-based payment to cause is such a unique environment, not to probably this audience, but when you're talking to a system, even a system that has critical access hospitals already in their network, the folks making the decisions and evaluating your performance are oftentimes not expert, not fluent at cost-based payment, and so often miss important aspects of your value. Again, rural-based opportunities have a lot of opportunity and a lot of value to them, and often those are missed. So we're talking about things like the value of an aligned primary care base, the value of incremental referrals, the value of 340B and access to 340B programs, swing bed program opportunities, those things that are really unique to community hospitals, smaller community hospitals, and rural entities, really important. So one of the questions we have is, what are folks getting wrong as we look at rural and we evaluate the risks and we evaluate the value? And one of the analogies we like to use is World War II. The Allies were very concerned about the losses of bombers, and some very smart people said, let's look at where the anti-aircraft is hitting the bomber and let's strengthen the bombers. Fortunately, there was an even smarter mathematician who said, wait a minute, we've got it all wrong. We've got survivor bias. We're only looking at the planes that come back. The planes that come back, we don't need to strengthen where they're being hit. It's the places that they're not being hit where we need to strengthen them. The idea being that the bombers that don't come back really provide the important data. And I think something similar is going on in rural. It's a bias, maybe not of this specific nature, but there's a conventional wisdom and a bias about rural performance that just pervades decision-making and performance evaluation. And one of the things we would say is we really need to fight against this. There's a lot of value in rural. There's a lot of accretive value for rural affiliates. And again, our experience is many systems don't factor in that value when evaluating rural performance. So we need to make sure that we don't just take conventional wisdom as fact, that we actually look at the underlying opportunities and programs. I'll give you an analogy. Rural labor and delivery, we see an epidemic of program closures. One of the things we've done is a deeper dive into that to discover that often the program evaluation is incomplete or flawed. The underlying cost analysis and filing of the cost report was flawed in terms of where the costs are allocated. And so what appeared to be a $3 million operating loss was actually only a $500,000 operating loss. And that didn't include the spin-off ancillaries from ultrasound and labs and clinic visits, et cetera. So it's really important to, again, question conventional wisdom and make sure the basis for analysis is correct when you're evaluating a rural affiliate. So just to conclude, all too often the folks who are at the table negotiating partnerships or evaluating an existing partnership don't have an appreciation for the risks or an accurate appreciation for the risks, but also misunderstand or frankly devalue the value that rural affiliates can bring to these equations. So this is an example of a multi-hospital system that was evaluating a community hospital affiliate, and they looked at the performance, allocated overhead, and said this affiliate is losing $13 million. We came in and said, wait a minute, let's make sure we're doing this correctly and evaluating this on direct and variable cost and contribution margin. And so when we looked at what was going on, we discovered they'd slashed capital investment, and that operating loss included non-cash depreciation expense and $3 million of non-operating income. So there was already a $10 million non-cash or other benefit that was not included in that. So they allocated $25 million of system overhead to create this $13 million operating loss, but only 20% of that was actually variable or incremental overhead cost attributable to this affiliate. So again, 20 million of that 25 million was being misapplied, misallocated. When you corrected these mistakes and looked at just the contribution margin from the affiliate before looking at the value of incremental referrals and patient income, the contribution margin, instead of being a $13 million negative operating margin, was a $17 million positive contribution margin. The affiliate had $22 million of incremental contribution margin from referrals. So you ended up with actually a positive accreted value of about $39 million from that system operating that particular affiliate. Again, this is an example of how the math sometimes can be way off, and the evaluation can be deeply flawed. This is a theme we're going to revisit and is really recurring, unfortunately, all too often when evaluating affiliate performance, and in particular, rural affiliate performance.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to briefly touch on some health industry factors that are increasing the strategic risk of healthcare organizations across the country. So since 2010, we've seen about 191 rural hospitals close or convert. And when we say convert, we mean those rural hospitals have converted to rural emergency hospitals where they've gotten rid of their inpatient beds. Of those 191 closed or converted rural hospitals, about 36% were PPS hospitals and about 35% were critical access hospitals. It's important to note that these closures aren't just in one region. They were across 35 different states, where 30% were centered in Texas, Tennessee, and Oklahoma combined. So we're seeing it across the country. It is present in some more states than others, but we're seeing it across the country. So at Stroudwater, we like to look at the three different major rating agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P. This is a chart from S&P that shows the U.S. not-for-profit healthcare outlook revisions showing favorable, all things that are blue above the x-axis, favorable credit ratings, and unfavorable credit ratings, all things that are highlighted yellow below the x-axis. And what's really important to pay attention to here is the ratio. So you can see in 2021, post-COVID, we really had that positive ratio. It was a positive outlook. Folks were coming out of COVID saying, okay, we're going to stabilize. We may even have a positive outlook for U.S. not-for-profit healthcare. And then that really dipped in 22 and 23 to a negative outlook. 2024, we started to kind of come out of that, and folks were saying it might be a stabilization, that they're not deteriorating anymore, that the outlook would be stable. However, with recent events going on at the national scale, that may be in jeopardy, and we may see that stabilization change, and that outlook may change this summer when these rating agencies come out with their next iteration. So that's something that's coming down the pipeline. So what's really driving affiliations across the country? What's driving this industry consolidation? And what's been going on historically with these transactions? So this bar graph here is showing the number of announced transactions from 2012 through 2024. And you can see that the transactions peaked, the number of transactions peaked 2015 through 2017 and have tapered off since then. But the key point shown in the line graph below is that the size of the affiliations have grown. That line graph is showing the average size of the smaller party involved in the affiliation. So while there have been less affiliations, those affiliations have been larger in revenue, meaning it's not a rural hospital affiliating with another rural hospital. It's a large health system affiliating with a large regional referral center, or two large health systems affiliating with each other. There's a couple catalysts behind that. You've got margin pressure, staffing crisis. You might have a Starbucks or a McDonald's that is paying folks more money than you're able to. You have provider shortages. Being a rural organization, it's harder to retain and recruit specialists and be able to afford specialist providers. And then something we like to comment on as well is the economies of skill. And what we mean by that is rural healthcare is a really complex environment. There's a lot of minutia. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. Finding folks who understand that environment and are able to navigate that environment and take advantage of certain levers for your organization is increasingly difficult. So being able to get those folks and have those folks be with your organization is a struggle. So you've got all these national headwinds that are affecting healthcare organizations across the country, whether you're an independent organization that wants to stay independent, whether you're an organization that is in an existing partnership, or whether you're an organization that wants to pursue affiliation or is open to a new partner. All of those options, those strategic options, come with inherent risks. There's no risk-free option, as Jeff said. The one thing that Stroudwater has found to mitigate that risk across the board is improved operational performance. We did a quick analysis, and over 27 different rural performance improvement projects that Stroudwater has done over the past 2.5 years yielded about 93.8 million in total performance improvement, or about 9.6% per organization of operating revenue was saved. And that revenue was generated from a couple of key functional areas outlined here. The three we'll touch on is inpatient growth, understanding what the barriers are to inpatient growth at your organization, understanding your revenue cycle, how to make your revenue cycle run more efficiently, how to reduce denials, increase collections, and then service line growth and expansion, making sure you're not cutting service lines, but understanding what's really needed in your community, what access to certain services are needed in the community, and what services are going to be volume drivers to your organization we found was critical to improved operational performance. So again, across these 27 different rural performance improvement engagements, we saw an average benefit of about 3.5 million per organization, or 9.6% of operating revenue per organization.
And the thing I would say, Claire, just to emphasize, when you think about the inherent risk profile of an organization, again, no risk-free options, but the only strategy we know to mitigate risk is improved operating results. That changes the dynamic. It basically strengthens the organization, creates additional runway, if you will. If the organization's been struggling and maybe has some liquidity constraints, that improved operating result is going to improve that. Conversely, if the organization is looking to partner as a potential solution and option going forward, then having improving operating results changes the nature of that conversation. It's no longer an act of desperation. You're moving from strength to strength, or at least you have a positive trajectory and a very different narrative when you're talking to prospective partners, and may bring additional options to the table. So there's the negotiating leverage and just frankly the number of options you have available to you. So incredibly important.
Completely agree, Jeff. And I think that gets to the point of, if you're an organization that's doing performance improvement activities, when is that next step of when you should be thinking about partnerships? If at all, should you be thinking about partnerships? When's the correct timing to do that? Excuse me. So at Stroudwater, we have a saying that time is never a neutral factor. And we mean a couple of things by that. The first is, it's a lot easier to run a partnership process or to affiliate with a potential partner when you're only a stressed hospital versus a distressed hospital. And to give an analogy for that, it's a lot easier to control a campfire than it is to control a wildfire. If you're trying to affiliate or partner and you're a distressed hospital or you're that wildfire, there's a limited number of things you can do. And it's going to take a lot of effort from that potential partner to come in and put that wildfire out. Whereas if you're a small campfire, there's a lot of mitigation strategies. There's a lot of strategies to improve performance. There's a lot of different strategies that can be utilized. And if you have a plan to demonstrate towards that potential partner, that creates leverage in your negotiations with that potential partner. You can come to the table and ask more and get more from your deal. So understanding that it's easier to partner as a stressed hospital, and you want to do that or look into options to doing that before you're in that distressed or area is really key. And the other thing we mean by time is never a neutral factor is if you're looking to do a partnership process or wanting to run a partnership process, it's important to do it efficiently and effectively. There are adverse events, major life events that we can't control that could happen. We've been involved in partnership processes. When COVID hit, we've had fires in server rooms, we've had lawsuits pop up. All of those things are adverse events and can delay the partnership process. So anything that you can do to shorten that vulnerability, to shorten that timeline is really crucial to run a complete partnership process. So how do you know if you're a wildfire or if you're a campfire, aka a distressed organization, a stressed organization, or a stable organization? How do you know where you fall on that scale? So we have a couple different kind of key metrics, and we have a much more detailed version of this slide as well. But we look at stable organizations and define those as really organizations that have consistent margins, they're growing top line revenue, they're able to reinvest in their asset base, they have stable or increasing market share. That's what we would really constitute as a stable organization. A stressed organization, we would say, is an organization that has 2+ years of declining margins, 2+ years of flat top line revenue, maybe not enough money to reinvest in their asset base or to do those important capital projects, and they might start to see a deterioration in market share. And finally, a distressed organization, we would classify as an organization that has 3+ years of declining or negative margins, 3+ years of flat or decreasing top line revenue. And then they're starting to do some cost cutting measures, whether you're cutting service lines or core programs, we're seeing those go away. And then you have reserves that are sufficient for less than 1 year of worsening losses. So again, kind of that would be our definition of a distressed organization. So how is the stress of your organization related to risk? Well, the factors that affect risk define the stress of your organization. So understanding where you fall and how those risk factors are impacting your organization will tell you if you're a stable, stressed, or distressed organization, and they will tell you which direction you're headed in. Are you a stable organization that's headed to stressed, or are you a stressed organization that's headed to distressed? So we define risk by 4 different domains. We have financial risk, operating risk, market risk, and value risk, and then a variety of different indicators that are within these domains. It's important to note that none of these domains operate within a silo. There's spillover effects. So if quality improves at a hospital or a hospital has very high quality, that's going to impact volume, which will impact revenue, which will impact the market position of the organization. They're all interrelated. What's important to remember is that you can't look at the risk of your organization in a 1-year timeline. You have to understand how it's going from 3 to 5 years, what your risk is doing, and how those factors are changing and the cumulative effects of those factors over 3 to 5 years, because that's really what's going to indicate where you are on that stable, stressed, or distressed scale. And understanding the risks. This gets back to something that we've already talked about, that there's no risk-free option. Really, as Jeff said, the one strategy that, regardless of your strategic option, if you're remaining independent in an existing partnership or looking for a new partnership, the one that's really going to work across all of those is improved operational performance. However, there are some additional risks within, if you're choosing to remain independent, you're assuming operating risks. It's really important that your board, your management team, and your medical staff are all on the same page with the objectives of your organization. Are you all rowing in the same direction and have the same kind of belief and understanding of where your organization wants to be in the future? And do you have a robust primary care base? Or do you have those primary care folks that are referring people to your organization to certain specialties? Are you reducing out migration through your primary care base? Conversely, if you're in an existing partnership or looking for a partnership, it's really important to understand your partner's track record with their rural affiliates. Have they been fair to their rural affiliates? Have they followed through on their commitments? Have they, enforced what's in their contract? All of those things are really important to look for, as Jeff will touch on later. And then also having contractually enforceable key terms, making sure things aren't just promises that are made, but that they're actually written in legal documents, that they're actually taken note. So as leadership changes, the sustainability of your organization isn't in jeopardy to promises made that weren't written down. So over to Jeff.
Thanks, Claire. So ensuring that a partnership, whether that's a prospective partnership or an existing partnership, creates value is a really important part of the work we do. So in addition, as Claire just touched on, to mitigating partnership risk and operating risk, we really want to make sure that we're unleashing that value. Part of this starts really with understanding that there is a whole range of partnership options available. And what is really important is to select the partnership structure or structures that best address organizational constraints, organizational needs of both the affiliate and the partnering organization. So we've had past clients who have come to us after doing an affiliation, and it became clear that the structure chosen was not a good fit. They needed capital, but the structure did not bring capital to the table, as an example. So really important to get the structure right and evaluate that, in addition to making sure you have the right partner and contractually enforceable terms. Those are really the three components. As we move to the right in this continuum, typically you're getting a deeper commitment, but also are more tightly aligned. So there's a corresponding loss of control, typically, along with getting that tighter commitment. The thing I would note is within each structure, there's huge variability. So a partner that's looking at a sole member substitution, which is the most common not-for-profit to not-for-profit affiliation structure, one prospective partner may require a whole bunch of control. Another one might actually be willing to cede and create a fair amount of autonomy in the affiliate. So a lot of that varies based upon the potential partner. Important to keep that in mind. So the value levers. If we're looking at a rural affiliate talking to a larger system, what are the things we want to make sure are being addressed and acknowledged? Cost-based payment if it's a critical access hospital. The opportunity to optimize the cost report, including looking at the home office cost allocation. So we have had clients of ours that have started a conversation with a system partner, and the system partner has been unwilling or not brought up the home office cost allocation. When we get involved and talk about that particular value lever, they'll say, well, we just don't see much upside. We'll do our analysis and say, well, geez, we're looking at that conservatively. We're estimating it at $3 million or $3 to $4 million a year. We really should have a conversation around this. It tends to change the nature of the discussion. Again, our experience is that the vast majority of that home office cost allocation is not actually incremental costs. It's a reallocation of existing overhead costs to the affiliate, which then qualifies to run through the cost report and get cost-based payment, i.e. incremental revenue. So really important to understand that component. Same thing's true with 340B. New definition of what constitutes a patient that can be applied and utilized in those programs. So if you're a rural affiliate that qualifies via DISH or qualifies via being a CA, then understanding what the value is under the new patient definition and how that can be optimized either as a standalone or within a system, really important. We often see swing bed programs vastly underutilized, not understood, as a component of the continuum of care and as a value added feature of affiliates in terms of how they can enhance the operational performance of a system, but also on a standalone basis. Importantly to note that we often find that the swing bed census is lagging significantly behind where it could or should be, and can be highly accretive. So there is a very significant amount of value, and one of the ones that I would really want to point to is the value of incremental referrals. And one of the things we've noted when we look at systems, you look at a county where a system has an aligned rural affiliate, and the neighboring county where that local hospital is not aligned with them, and you just do a side-by-side comparison, we often find that the difference in market share for the system is 10% or more. You put a value on the contribution margin of those 10% of referrals and that corresponding volume, it's very significant. So an important aspect not to be ignored, not to be not included as part of the value proposition that an affiliate can bring to a system partner. One of the things to note, as we talked about these different options, some of those value levers become readily available. The home office cost allocation is the most restrictive. The system partner needs to have operating control and operating risks. So a management agreement typically is not going to qualify for that. But there are a number of things that allow you swing bed really across the board, creates an opportunity to tap into that. And there is some flexibility within the 340B program and some of these new definitions, depending upon how it's structured and what kind of clinical cooperative model exists. So again, important to understand the opportunities and the constraints associated with each of these structures as you look at what the needs are and the opportunities are for partnership. We've said it before, it's worth repeating. Partnering is not a risk-free endeavor. It's not a panacea. So how do you approach that knowing that that's the case? Well, for an existing partnership, make sure that your partner understands your value and your value proposition. And this is something that's not a one-off. It probably needs to be repeated and continually emphasized. Assure that the affiliation structure is aligned with creating that value. So if a big part of that value is creating a tighter clinical and operational alignment, then you want to have a structure that's going to facilitate that. If that's not necessary, then you've got more options. You want to look at those missed and potential opportunities, and you want to quantify the ROI of investments and initiatives that reflect the rural value proposition. One of the things to note via cost-based payment, if the affiliate is a critical access hospital, then the incremental depreciation and interest payment associated with the capital investment can run through the cost report and helps offset that incremental cost, improving ROI of that investment, something that's not true in all likelihood at the parent. For prospective partners, you want to make sure that you vetted them. What is their track record? Are they strategically aligned? And what has their performance been like? We've had situations where two finalists are saying everything you want to hear. We go in and we dig into the track record of their affiliates from pre-affiliation through post-affiliation, and we find a very different track record in some instances, where that the affiliates are continually starved of capital, and when a member of the medical community retires or moves away, that person's not replaced. And you see the result is a significant decline in market share and services and capability over time. Not an ideal partnership if it can be avoided, and especially if you've got an option where they do make those investments and they do make the effort to renew and replace departing providers. Again, contractually enforceable terms are key, and having somebody post affiliation that has standing to enforce the agreement, whether that's a foundation, whether that's a board or an advisory board, having standing and having some resources to enforce the agreement is an important consideration. So for existing partnerships, really important to understand these may not be performing the way an affiliate or even the system might like. What is the reason for that? Well, let's make sure that we're identifying untapped value, quantifying what those opportunities are, being realistic and pragmatic about it. So let's not overpromise. let's identify early wins, things that are easy to achieve. Maybe they have a lower upfront cost, a shorter payback period. They're not extremely difficult to execute, and they're aligned with the partner strategy and the affiliate strategy as well. Importantly, as I mentioned before, the evaluation of affiliate performance and affiliate opportunities may be flawed. And so it's really important to dig into that and understand how that is being quantified and evaluated. But that focus on education is really key. So this is an example of an existing system. They had 4 critical access hospitals, very small, altogether about 55 million in operating revenue. The system came to us and said, these guys are dragging us down. They are killing us. Can you help? And so we went in and did an operational evaluation and looked at all those things that Claire referenced earlier in terms of operational performance improvement opportunities. And what we found was there was basically $6 million in opportunities that they had not captured. These were things that, like, for instance, not maximizing the cost report, not fully utilizing swing beds, not taking advantage fully of 340B at these various affiliates. And so that's real incremental cash of about $6 million. But we also found about $9 million in evaluation errors. So these were errors the system was not attributing value for appropriately for incremental referrals, or were allocating 100% overhead to the affiliates when they shouldn't be. So all told, the system was missing and an error by about $15 million, $6 million of real incremental cash flow opportunity, and about $9 million of misallocated value and costs when they were evaluating the performance of these affiliates. So that $15 million would have resulted in a strategic set of strategic decisions that would have been really destroyed a lot of value for that system. By getting the math right, getting the evaluation right, identifying the operational opportunities, you end up with a different set of decisions. And those decisions are accretive in value to the system going forward, and also accretive in value to the rural affiliate. So that's really a key message here for systems with rural or other affiliates, making sure we get the evaluation correct as we look at those. So as we think about the far-reaching effects of a rural affiliate, we think about these as network effects, that the system overall, the performance of the system is enhanced when you have rural affiliates that are performing. And if the decision is made, perhaps based upon flawed analysis, to start scaling back that network and cutting to realize short-term budgetary constraints, which can be very, very serious. I don't mean to minimize those, but the challenge is long-term, what that does is it reduces the capability and capacity of that network, and frankly, the financial performance of that network. So you think about these affiliates, how they can drive growth via incremental referrals, retaining market share within the network, that user retention, the ability to engage more consistently and frequently, which has benefits for health status and outcomes, but also benefits from a business standpoint as well. That increasing the number of connections and interactions for these patients, that creating relevant and accessible points of access is really important. And also really measuring and monitoring and evaluating the referral rate. What are the barriers to referrals? Are there barriers to getting in? Are there other strategies and tactics we can use to enhance the referral rate? Now, many systems have capacity constraints at the system parent. So the emphasis might be on, let's make sure we retain low acuity cases in the rural affiliate and don't clog up capacity at the system mothership. And again, very important in terms of the overall performance of the system. If you systematically reduced capacity and capability at your affiliates, your ability to do that and redirect and retain those care at the affiliates is greatly reduced. So that's what we mean by network effects, and it's something that I think many systems have moved away from via short-term imperatives around performance. And I think there's a long-term strategic value here that should be included.
Jeff has talked about existing partnerships and really network effects. We also want to talk about recommendations for new partnerships. And the biggest one that we'll emphasize here, it's really important to run a competitive process. You want folks to compete for the privilege of being your partner, because running a competitive process allows you to do a couple things. It allows you to gather information about your options. Per Jeff's earlier comments, it allows you to gather information and vet a potential partner's track record, how they've treated their rural affiliates historically, and it allows you to educate prospective partners on your value. And from that education, you can see if they're willing to adjust their terms and commitments to reflect that value that you've been able to demonstrate to them. Are they willing? Do they recognize that you have value? Are they willing to concede that you have value and therefore change their commitments? That allows you to have some leverage at the negotiation table and be able to negotiate a better LOI and a better definitive agreement. And I think the biggest thing too is don't sign an LOI until you have an acceptable term sheet in hand. And what we mean by that is really make sure you're ironing out those commitments prior to signing that LOI. You want that LOI to be more reflective of a definitive agreement instead of ironing out those key concepts between that signing an LOI and having a definitive agreement. So making sure that LOI is acceptable, even though it's non-binding, that you're really reflecting what you want to have in the definitive agreement is going to be key for running a process. So an example of this where we're able to show value of our client to a potential partner is we were working with the critical access hospital that was firmly in the distressed area. They were projected to have a negative cash balance within 2 years and really needed to find a partner. So using the value levers that Jeff talked about earlier, we determined that our client would be able to fund about $3.6 million of the needed investments that they needed to make in their facility and in their community, and increase their operating performance by about $670K annually through a partnership. That doesn't mean that the partner was giving them money. This was purely just through the structure of a partnership and taking advantage of these value levers. So by quantifying these, our client received strong proposals from different potential partners, and as of April 2024, signed an LOI with a preferred partner and closed on a definitive agreement on June 1st of 2024. And this partner brought to the table firm commitments to keep access to care in the area. The hospital would remain a critical access hospital and services would remain there, and really became and sustained its ability to be a crucial part of the healthcare for that community. And just a quick understanding of what this looks like. For this client, the levers we looked at were the swing bed estimate, the 340B opportunity, a cost report opportunity, and then we did a low and high estimate for the home office cost allocation, all on a conservative basis. Notice that we didn't include incremental referrals here, which, as Jeff mentioned, really do have a big impact. These, again, are on such a conservative basis. And you can see that the net change in operating performance, inclusive of 100% debt financing, required of investment of about 3.6 million, and cost-based reimbursement of about 40%. The net change in operating performance on the low side never drops below 670K. So again, just being able to demonstrate that value of a distressed critical access hospital to potential clients is really important.
So we're getting to the end here. Key takeaways, and then we can have some questions. So for rural partnerships, the accretive value of existing and prospective rural affiliates is almost always misunderstood and undervalued, or potentially even absent from negotiations or management decision making. Again, there's an approach that just assumes that the story around rural is, this is going to be not accretive. Maybe it has strategic value, but we're likely not to see an ROI on an affiliation process here. Part of mitigating that is the emphasis on having the right trajectory for operating results and making sure operating results are ideally moving in the right direction and ideally positive. But the other aspect of this, and perhaps the bigger aspect of this, is just the fact that larger narrative clouds an accurate evaluation of what the accretive value levers are. So it's really important that folks be educated and that negotiations occur with an understanding of what that value is. Getting back to that opening analogy, you know, everybody should understand the value of the cards you have. And unlike poker, where you might want to hold them to yourselves, you know, you want to be sharing that value and articulating that value and quantifying that value. So really important. The value of the referral network, again, likely to be excluded, but something that is incredibly important. And when you're thinking about the strategic value, and again, ample opportunities to demonstrate in real world, from real world cases, that's value. So the result of this is deal terms that often that could reinforce long-term value creation are absent because that value proposition is not recognized. Systems that often then operate the rural affiliates often miss value-added opportunities or fail to accurately evaluate the performance of their rural affiliates going forward. And so the end result is of either of those scenarios is chronic underinvestment in rural affiliates. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the deal terms don't reflect value, which is a huge problem. The deal terms overstate the risk. And once you're involved with the system, all too often that system fails to take advantage of those opportunities going forward. So long term, both system and rural affiliate performance is diluted and suboptimized. And again, going back to that system that had 4 critical access hospitals and was convinced the critical access hospitals were dragging them down. Well, when you pull back the covers and actually dig into the operating performance and the evaluation methodology, what you find is a $15 million mistake on a $55 million revenue set of affiliates, which is a huge margin of error. So that's it. We can move to questions. Claire and I are so appreciative. If you have questions for either of us, our contact information is there, and we are always happy to talk to folks who are navigating these issues, whether it be an existing partner that just seems to be resistant to acknowledging value, and how do you move beyond that, to you know, an organization that needs to improve operating results, and you know, what are some methodologies or approaches for doing that. But we're happy to entertain questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. We have had a couple come in, couple questions about slides. Yes, Stroudwater will reach out with slides. Don't worry about that. And the recording will come out later this afternoon. Couple questions centered around the same thing. So I'm just going to dive in. In your opinion, what are the key areas that cause you concern when considering the current governmental changes to HHS?
There's a lot of, I mean, it's the overall uncertainty and volatility of the environment, whether it's disruptions to programs and how they've been administered, the pending Medicaid cuts, you know, any number of programs that have benefited rural hospitals and health systems. You know, the longevity and the future trajectory of those is really unclear. So that creates just this high degree of uncertainty, which it can become very difficult to make plans. And one of the things that I think we often come back to at Stroudwater when there is this level of uncertainty is what is enduring, what makes sense regardless of the outcome. So, you know, in this scenario, one of the things that Claire and I have emphasized is operational performance improvement, and how that is such an important risk mitigation strategy. And I think that probably is doubly true in an environment where you have this level of uncertainty and in all likelihood some real challenges coming down the pike with Medicaid cuts for rural providers who have more exposure to that. So that operational performance improvement and doing that as a key strategy to mitigate risk, improve the runway, and mitigate some of the uncertainty is really, really key. As it relates to partnering, I expect that some of the uncertainty will alleviate over time, and that will allow for more planning. But again, if let's say you're in an existing partnership, certainly focusing on the accretive value you can bring and making sure that the analysis and evaluation of that value is being done correctly. No time like now, it's high degree of uncertainty to say, listen, this is the value we're bringing, or this is an opportunity to increase that value. So I think those types of conversations and that type of focus is probably really beneficial in the current environment with again, all the volatility, all the uncertainty.
Great, thank you so much. Next question. I think we only really have time for one or two more. I want to make sure that you guys get Jeff and Claire's information at the end. How do you recommend starting to have this conversation with a current partner? How would you begin to approach the conversation?
Claire, why don't you take this one?
No problem. I think the biggest thing is identifying what the low-hanging fruit are. How can you build trust with an existing partner to understand, okay, what are the areas that we can tackle pretty easily, pretty effectively, and have an immediate improvement? A lot of times that's not necessarily the home office cost allocation, because that takes a year to really implement, but it could be swing bed. It could be those incremental referrals. What are those areas that you can tackle to get and see the progress that you're making with an existing partner to build trust across the board? I think the key here is building trust and that foundation to tackle some of the harder value levers to grasp down the line.
Thank you. I'm going to summarize this one up into just one question. I will make sure, Andy, that Jeff and Claire get this afterwards so they can tackle all parts of it. But I just want to make sure we get at least the question part in. So Jeff, Claire, how do you recommend that a rural hospital seeking a partner overcome the fact that often there are no interested parties, let alone parties competing with each other for the opportunity?
Well, first of all, it only takes one, right? You really only need one. Now, ideally, you have multiple, because you want to have your board to be informed, and you want to be able to really use that to your advantage. But at the end of the day, you only need one. What I would suggest is, though, that you not acknowledge that that's exclusive, because I think it's when you tell a prospective partner that they're the only ones you're talking to, it's less likely you're going to get their A game in terms of what they're bringing to the table. When they feel they're needing to compete to be your partner, they tend to be willing to bring more to the table. So that would be one. The second thing I would say is it really is a question of documenting, quantifying your value proposition. So you may have negative operating margin as a standalone organization. But one of the things that Claire and our team did in the example she gave was, let's look, and we can quantify this, let's look at the home office cost benefit from various prospective parties. We can do this from public information. All of a sudden now you've got an additional benefit that helps change the profile of that rural affiliate. Again, if we assume 80% of the home office cost allocation is not incremental, but it's just a reallocation of existing overhead cost, and that then runs through the cost report at 40 or 50% reimbursement, that can be a very material pickup. So you start doing those types of analyses and looking, and one of the things, from strategic value perspective, again, the example Claire gave, this was a distressed CA with a asset base, a lot of deferred maintenance, fully depreciated assets, older medical staff. Their partner looked at them and the value of incremental referrals, and frankly, the strategic value of securing their secondary market where these folks were, and saying this would be a really great outpost to making sure that nobody else takes that market away from us. So it's strategic value, it's quantifying the value proposition, and finding those value levers at the end of the day. That's not a guarantee that somebody will come to the table, but I will say we've had pretty good success in being able to calculate, articulate, quantify that value proposition, and use that to the advantage of our clients and create some long-term win-win partnerships.
Great, thank you so much for all the information. We are at time, so I'm going to turn it over to you for some closing remarks, and then I'll end us for the day.
I just, Cody, I'm so appreciative of the work that you and NRHA do to make this platform available. I just would say that Claire and I are happy to answer questions. You know, if we haven't seen it before, we may know somebody who has, but in all likelihood, we've probably seen whatever the conundrum is before and might be able to help you navigate it. So happy to be a sounding board and a resource for folks as they navigate what is a very, very challenging environment, to be sure.
I echo Jeff's comments. Thank you so much, Cody and NRHA. And again, please reach out if you have additional questions or comments.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff and Claire, and thank you, Stroudwater Associates, for your ongoing support as a Platinum partner with NRHA and your commitment to improving rural healthcare. Your support makes sessions like this and our upcoming conference in May possible, and you definitely help advance the mission of rural health and all that you do. Everyone, I will let you go. Have a great day. Don't forget that recording will be sent out later today. There is a brief survey. I promise I really do go through all those surveys and I take in all that information when creating this series. So everyone be safe and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.